Once of a day, it was very normal that you had a solo person earning and someone that was keeping house.
We always talk about, which is the way it's always been done, or certainly for a couple of generations, which is get together, raise a family, carry on working, and then keep working until the kids leave home.
And the only reason better should come into the equation is what's better for your relationship? What's better for your choice of living? What's better for the next 20, 30, 40 years you're going to live?
It also sort of, always interested about how we've ended up where we are.
And I'd never really given it thought of the idea that why wouldn't you have a two-person household?
Life and everything. So you end up being far more of a unit in that way and not being separate, I think.
He was describing himself in a roundabout way, and he said, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, but I'm a big believer in the full saying. Did you know that there's a piece that comes after that?
And do women actually want to work as hard and as long in these sort of careers that are demanding, when it takes them away from female instincts of raising your children and keeping a household and all sort of thing?
If you're going to spend a couple of decades living a double household income, then statistically, when you're dying, you're not going to have any reverence towards that.
My wife, Kerry, started out on a career, but then when we decided we want to have kids, she realised she was in a career where they were literally going to make a choice.
And if you turned to me and said, I'm comfortable being at home, I'm cool with that. If you turned around to me and said, that's not what I want, and said that I'm cool with that as well. Once of a day, it was very normal that you had a solo person earning and someone that was keeping house. And then at some stage, I'm going to say 70s, 80s, two household income became a thing as post World War II. And I'm assuming, I'm guessing these are the drivers for it. I can't recall at this stage, but it seems logical that post World War II, when you have a lot of, in that instance, women moving into jobs that during war was usually covered by men, that will have fueled a spur in women enjoying being at work outside of the household, because traditionally you would have had more of the women at the home and more of the men working. And then this move now where it's so normal to have a double household income. And the parallels with that when you start to travel and you can live in different countries that have got different cost bases. And certainly from our perspective, the benefit that derived in our relationship for me and Christina in not being in places where you had to have a double household income. There's freedom in the space. So there's that aspect of income. What you're seeing and what you were just talking about there, the opposite parallel is where you're in Australia and everything's perfect and gorgeous. But the only way to maintain that is for both parties to have a full-time job. And then on that basis, you can continue to live in the environment you're in. And the question that wraps over all of that, and it's not about which one's better. The question is, what do you want? And the only reason better should come into the equation is what's better for your relationship? What's better for your choice of living? What's better for the next 20, 30, 40 years you're going to live? What do you want to do? Do you want to spend the next couple of decades having to both work and the stress that that can cause and everything else that comes with two parties being out of that house and working their ass off? Or do you want something that's different for yourself, for your relationship, that you can maybe derive from expanding out and going and living somewhere else?
It's definitely an interesting one. We spent time at a friend of a friend's house, lived in an amazing, incredible house here. It must have been worth millions and millions, in a very, very beautiful location, almost a 360 view of the northern beaches here in Sydney. And I know very interested in the notion of what we've done, which is live and move abroad in Bali for us. But I suppose there's so often that kind of like fixed kind of linear path, which we always talk about, which is the way it's always been done, or certainly for a couple of generations, which is get together, raise a family, carry on working, and then keep working until the kids leave home, and then move into that sort of retirement sort of phase. And that definitely is coming back to somewhere like Australia, having been in Bali for an entire year and not having left, been there for 3 years now, but haven't left for a year. So you kind of forget that how other people live, and aware of this kind of linear path and everything, but actually seeing it in front of you and listening to people talk about it, it's still very, very hard to break away. And they were working from home, but obviously working very, very hard and working to maintain a lifestyle. So I think it's an interesting one to sort of, in the first instance, move away from thinking about it, but actually moving away to actually to doing something about it and living somewhere else. So that's the first thing. But just as you were talking there, it also sort of, always interested about how we've ended up where we are. And it's a bit of a controversial, maybe it's a little bit more of a controversial topic now, but because of the flexibility and the empowerment of women and more equal some would say it's not always equal, but the idea that there's equality in terms of certainly in the workplace or the ability to go and work, but there's sort of the what's kind of breaking down in families and then and societies and communities is this idea that two householders work equally as hard to maintain the lifestyle, and moving away more and more from the gender kind of stereotypes a little bit. And I do sort of, I'm always interested in lots of people's opinions about this, but it doesn't always seem to work out. And I think what we're seeing is when people are living to work, that is it serving people in the right way, right? And you have to sort of look, people have to spend a lot of time looking inward and really think about what you were just talking about, well, what is it I actually want? And do women actually want to work as hard and as long in these sort of careers that are demanding when it takes them away from female instincts of raising your children and keeping a household and all sort of things, which, I'm not saying either one is right, but I think the more I see it and the more pressure there is in the world, I see that unraveling a lot more. But the reality is that we are where we are. And I have an opinion as well on what's happened over the last 50 years or so for that to become the case. A lot of it to do with just the way that money has moved in the world and the economies and things like that. So I'm interested. It's not exactly carrying on the thread of your conversation there in terms of specifically moving away, but I think it's way more nuanced. I'm interested in that sort of those kind of gender roles.
Well, rather than picking up on where my mind first went to, because I can't help but kind of tell the story. Weirdly, and as you were saying that, I was thinking here, I was in this house that I'm in now. So I'm in Puerto Morelos in Mexico, and we're staying at a friend's house. They're over in Norway, spending time under the Aurora Borealis and doing a lot of magical things. So we said we'd come and live in the house for a little bit, look after their 2 dogs and a cat. And I was in this house when I said to Christina one day, and this is literally how I phrased it, because it took a lot for me. I grew up, my mum was a president of a massive charity, both fair parents worked, and I'd never really given it thought of the idea that why wouldn't you have a 2-person household? Like if somebody wants to work, and it makes sense that 2 people work. The idea of someone working and someone staying at home just wasn't as familiar to me back then. And I said to her, I think I've realized that I think I might be maybe more open to the possibility of a traditional household relationship. And she said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, first of all, I phrased it with 6 question marks beforehand, because I'm going through this process. And it was the first time I'd said it out loud. I said, if you want to work, build a career, build a business, I will support you all the way. And that's got nothing to do with whether I'm open to a more traditional sexualized energy relationship, meaning a masculine energy goes here and the feminine energy goes there. And by nature, I fold into the masculine energy more in our relationship, and Christina's more feminine. And I said, but I think I'm more open to it. Like, I'm happy being the primary bread earner. She said, you are. And I said, yeah, but we've never said it. And I said, you might be sat there on an assumption that I think you have to work, or that I think you need to earn more money, or whatever, like some thought that exists over here that we've never spoken about, and you're trying to meet it, or vice versa, or anything like that. And I said, well, at the end of the day, we're a team. We've got stuff to do. It's like I'm just basically stating 2 points. My first point is I am really comfortable playing that role. And if you turned to me and said, I'm comfortable being at home, I'm cool with that. If you turned around to me and said, that's not what I want, and said that, I'm cool with that as well. But I wanted to state it externally. That took us on an entire, at least a 1-year process of exploration, and all sorts came up for her, all sorts came up for me. And where we've got to today, Christina still has clients. She's a trained psychotherapist. She has written a book. She still wants to do coaching, but what's been removed is the unspoken expectation that it must achieve. It must hit a level, whatever that even means. Like, it's unspoken, you got to do more. That energy that sits sometimes behind a business, or a person driving a business, like I'm here and I've got to get to there. And just us having that conversation now, we can reflect back. Her not having the pressure to have to find clients to earn. Instead, she has to find clients because she chooses to find clients. She wishes it. And it's nice. And whatever money comes in, her money normally covers all the shopping and stuff like that. Because we like to attribute, we've talked about this before in SSN, if you're earning in small chunks, don't think, oh, that's only $100 or whatever the figure might be. That's a really nice night out for two of you, or it's the week's shopping. Like attribute it to a thing, and when you pay for that thing, you're like, this was paid for from that over there. So I'm not going to turn around and say we're a nuclear family in that sense, and she's at home with an apron on, baking sourdough bread in the kitchen from a culture that she took from France on a cooking trip. But we have naturally now formed into these spaces where she'll take on much more of the house stuff. If she needs me, she'll ask for me, same as vice versa if I need her. And we've just found our own way in there. And I suppose it's Pareto's example of 80-20 that I do 80% over here, 20% over there, and she does vice versa. But as a result now of us having actually slightly more clearly defined roles through choice and exploration, our relationship is better. And whenever we are, to link it back to traveling, whenever we are traveling, our ability to center in and ground into a place is just easier. Because you know what it's like when you move to a new place. If you're working your ass off, everything's new. You're trying to sort out your internet, your desk, where you're working, if you're on calls, your backdrop. Same again if you're in a if you're spending time and you're cooking and you're buying food and produce. I always make that joke. Where do I find red quinoa? Yeah, and you're in some new town. So I think it's made a big impact for us. So you're right, it's not the original topic of the conversation, but I do think it is a really important one that is useful as you're exploring what on earth do I want from my life. And if you're in a relationship, my life, their life, our life, they're independent, but there's also there's three lives that are there.
Or I think that's definitely the case. But I think it's definitely, I mean, we're the same. I would say to a larger degree. My wife, Kerry, started out on a career, but then when we decided we want to have kids, she realized she was in a career where they were literally going to make a choice, which was, well, it's an unsaid choice. You can't go and raise a family and have the flexibility in the kind of industry which she was in, which was branding, design, in a sort of, large agencies in London and things. So she observed quite early on that the women that made that choice were single, and the ones that she'd observed that done well were in their 50s and obviously followed the career trajectory. But it wasn't possible for her. It was an unspoken thing that you had to be there all hours, working into the small hours of the morning to get projects done. It's not conducive to raising a family, right? So she made a choice early on that even though that's the career path that she'd chosen, that it wasn't going to be the thing she wanted to do if she wanted to have the life that we had. So she kind of, when we did that, we set up side businesses, we set up a real estate business, and she worked in that a little bit, and she worked in my businesses as well that I created, and then we co-created businesses. But I think once you kind of end up, and that working together as a unit, I guess, means that you do make some sacrifices in that when you come home from work in the day, that conversation carries on because it's actually part of your life. You working together on a project, whether that's a business or everything, is as much of a project as the life you've got with your kids and the things you want to do and the house you want to build or the things you want to do with your life and everything. So you end up being far more of a unit in that way and not being separate. I think if people follow two careers, then they're less likely to do that because they're not working together on it fully. They're working on their life together, but if you're working all day in two jobs, then those consume you a lot if you are trying to maintain a certain lifestyle. And so you don't end up on working on life as a project together, is my observation in the same way. It becomes much more an independent kind of thing because you're working on your own independent careers, but you're also trying to maintain that lifestyle together to build that life. But it becomes more difficult because they are separate. So that does come with its own pressures. And those are the pressures that I kind of observe as I move from Bali, where it's much more relaxed and slow tempo, back into Australia, which is an incredible lifestyle here on the northern beaches. But it's not typical, I would say, of most of Australia in terms of how most people live, which is just wonderful. Walking around with their coffee cups, walking up and down the beach, and living that sort of outdoor lifestyle, which is wonderful. But the reality behind it, I wonder about it sometimes, to be able to maintain both of those things. People are definitely living separate lives in terms of the careers they're working on within the family unit. So I think it does kind of, when you want to open up to the idea of, well, what is it we actually want? You're not only just trying to bring two people, you're not just trying to make a decision as a family. You've got two career paths to kind of like, well, you're going to do this and I'm going to do that. And what choices are we going to make individually to make a choice as a family together to go and do something different? Man, it's hard, really hard at that point to sort of separate those two things. And I can see that. Here. And that is going back to the earlier part of the conversation is, well, that's just become the reality. And maybe it's interesting to talk about why that reality exists so that people can at least sort of think about their current circumstances and if it's serving them in the right way to follow those sort of paths, if that's what they're feeling, the sort of pressures in life to sort of maintain two jobs, income, to just to maintain a lifestyle and look at, because I always find it useful to look at, well, why have we ended up here? Actually, is this what I really want, right? Have I just become a victim of circumstance? Have I just become a victim of the way things are? And that's now the way we kind of live our lives. If you understand how it's happened, sometimes it can help to sort of reposition your perception to sort of think, actually, I didn't make this choice in the same way that I thought I might have. And do I have a new choice going forward?
Do you know what first principle thinking is?
Uh, to a degree, but I'm sure you can explain it.
I mean, I only know it. I came across it the other day, and I'd heard it before, but I was like, I don't know, it piqued my interest. So I've been consuming, you know what YouTube's like. As soon as you think a thought, all of a sudden there's just videos popping up. So I don't know where I either had the conversation or I've clicked something somewhere, but YouTube served it me and reminded me again. So I started watching stuff, and I've been thinking a lot about it recently. The new portal that we're making for all the members, we had iteratively changed a particular process with the old portal and got to here. And that's one of the things we want the new portal to fix. So I was making a better version of this. And it was last night walking the dogs. I was like, hang on, I'm trying to fix this, right? That's the assumption that that's the problem. But that was a solution to this problem, which was a solution to this problem. So I zoomed out and I remembered first principle thinking. And I was like, what's the problem? And then we went right back to the actual problem and realized the solution had nothing to do with this. This was it made sense at the time how we got to that point. The solution's over here. So we totally changed it.
Mm.
And that's what popped in my mind with what you were just talking about there. We are in a state of reality today, which is a byproduct of a solution to an iterative amount of problems. Now, were the problems curated? Where did they come from? That's the whole conversation. But nonetheless, like society is in this space today, we think this is the best we've got. And one of the questions that is always asked in Sovereign Soul, or that we ask members, like, what do you want? What are you doing this for? And I think that's at the core of what you were just saying there. So you've got, you know, the Northern Beaches Aussie lifestyle, and everyone's working these jobs or operating how they are. And you have a whole host of other ways that you can choose to live and be. And if we apply first principle thinking to life, then you kind of get into those core questions like, how old are you? What do you want to do? Where would you like to do it? And that none of these things have got anything to do with double careers. And if we link this to the end goal, ultimate end goal being death, well, you know, I don't see it as a goal, ultimate end point being death. No one on their deathbed said, I'm really glad I worked that much. And we know from that book, Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, in fact, one of them says, I wish I hadn't worked that hard. So on that basis, if you're going to spend a couple of decades living a double household income, then statistically, when you're dying, you're not going to have any reverence towards that. Probably you're going to have some element of distaste, like I've wasted the time or anything. So that first principle thinking, when we think about household, income, careers, relationship, or relationships, if you want to say that, I think it becomes really prevalent because now you're kind of getting to that core of what is the problem we're solving? And you can define your purpose in life however you want, but if we were to distill it down to context, the problem we're solving is what do you want? And it's unlikely that both people are fervently like, I want a career. We're sold the idea that a career is this thing that we should do and we should maintain a path. And I was talking with some guys the other day, and he said to me, he was describing himself in a roundabout way, and he said, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, but I'm a big believer in the full saying. And I haven't fact checked this, right? But it was good nonetheless. Did you know that there's a piece that comes after that? And apparently, the full statement is a jack of all trades, master of none is often better than a jack of no trades, master of one.
Okay.
And in that moment, when you're thinking about it, and we go back to like the problem we're solving or everything, and we strip everything away, we're just getting down to what is it that you want to do? Awesome, man. Well, for anyone listening, if you are interested in moving forward and finding that next chapter in your life, the simplest, easiest thing to do is to join our newsletter. You can hit the QR code, you'll find the link below. Every single day, we send you tools, tips, hints, and just some of the musings that come out of one of our heads of what you can do to make a difference in your life. And if you enjoy that, there's much more you can do But we always say begin first, we just take it a little bit more. But the simplest thing to do is see what's going on in the newsletter.